Through project preparation facilities, such as the NEPADA PPF Special Fund, we are addressing the bankability gap. We are advocating for stronger de-risking frameworks to attract private capital, ensuring that African infrastructure becomes a competitive infrastructure asset class. The bank is deploying a sophisticated toolkit of innovative instruments to modernize transport and mobility across the continent. First, we are pioneering asset recycling, fostering public-private partnership, and creating dedicated framework for aviation and road safety. Second, our commitment is visible in strategic corridors and flagship projects like the Lobitu Corridor and Abidjan-Lagos Highway, which serve as the industrial arteries of our region. Third, through the Integrated Aviation Transformation Program, we are enhancing safety and connectivity, directly supporting the single African air transport market, SATAM. Our work is inextricably linked to African Union Agenda 2063 and the success of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Regional integration is not longer a luxury. It is a necessity for economic survival. In collaboration with South Africa, the African Development Bank has launched the Ubuntu Initiative. The program is specifically designed to harmonize and accelerate cross-border infrastructure, removing the physical and regulatory bottlenecks that hinder trade. Through our engagement with G20, we are ensuring that Africa's infrastructure needs remain at the forefront of the global development agenda. Excellency, the African Development Bank is more than a development institution. We are your development solution provider and long-term partner. As we deliberate today, let us focus on how we de-risk, how we accelerate, how we deliver on integrated Africa. I wish us all a productive and impactful ministerial session. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the AFDB. Reminding us that the backbone of the Africa we want tomorrow must be built today. As we descend later on into discussions, we need to locate this contextual setting in how we frame the outcomes of this meeting. Critical intervention under the Ubuntu facility to facilitate cross-border infrastructure development. Critical because the scale and quantum of investment that we require will not be served by projects, but by taking an intra-member state approach to a program of infrastructure delivery, and critical around how we build capability to risk projects, how we accelerate project delivery, and how we execute efficiently and timelessly. With that, as I appreciate the input by the AFDB, may I ask the representative of UNECA, the Executive Secretary, to deliver remarks. Thank you very much.
Honorable Ministers present, Her Excellency Commissioner for Energy and Infrastructure of the African Union Commission, Her Excellency the CEO of our NEPAD, representatives of international, regional, and national institutions, colleagues of the United Nations system, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I extend greetings from the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Ambassador Claver Katete, who could not be here because of the ongoing African Regional Forum for Sustainable Development in Addis Ababa. He recognizes the importance of the STC on transport and energy and asks me to assure you all of his commitment to the advancement of the continent's transport and energy agenda. The need for policy integration of these two sectors has never been higher. Excellencies, allow me to start by thanking the government of the Republic of South Africa for ably hosting and guiding this STC meeting and extending to us a very warm welcome. ECA also commends the government of South Africa for positioning energy and transport as priorities during the presidency of G20. The government's advocacy for debt sustainability, financing of just energy transition, building resilient infrastructure, and leveraging critical minerals for inclusive growth was refreshing and timely. These policy priorities have implications for the future of energy and transport in Africa. Excellencies, distinguished participants, strategic imperatives and emerging challenges are shaping our transport and energy systems. First, the ongoing crisis in the Gulf region and the consequent disruption in shipping is impacting on energy and transport sectors. This is affecting African economies and threatening to reverse some of the gains the continent has made in advancing sustainable development. The crisis in the Middle East highlights the necessity to accelerate energy transition, advance the domestication of sustainable energy sources, including nuclear energy, leverage energy integration by implementing regional projects, including those in PIDA, and implement measures to advance collective energy security. It also underscores the need for African countries to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles and strengthen the resilience of the continent's air transport system. In this regard, I note with satisfaction that experts from member states have considered and supported various frameworks discussed in the last 3 days, including the Continental Energy Security Policy Framework, the Continental Electric Vehicle Framework, as well as the policy guidelines to enhance the resilience of the continent's aviation industry. We believe these frameworks will take us in the right direction in strengthening transport and energy systems on the continent. Excellencies, distinguished participants, the second trend that I would like to highlight is the transformative impact of digital and frontier technology is shaping the future of growth and prosperity on our continent. Africa is experiencing growth in these technologies, yet the continent lags other regions of the world. Challenges relate to inadequate digital public infrastructure, supportive hard and soft infrastructure, and enabling policy and regulatory regimes which remain critical. Moreover, critical infrastructure such as data centers to ensure data sovereignty and support the global digital market requires secure, reliable, and sustainable energy supplies. Similarly, advances in battery technologies are not only improving energy security, but also transitioning transport systems towards greater sustainability. Therefore, strategic initiatives in the transport, energy, and digital infrastructure sectors should not be viewed in isolation, but integrated solutions should be leveraged to advance growth, sustainable development, and economic transformation. The 2026 edition of ECA's flagship publication, Economic Report on Africa, provides insights in this subject. Ladies and gentlemen, the strategic imperative of boosting intra-African trade to promote collective development on the continent and the implications for transport and energy also merit attention. While transport facilitates trade, enhanced trade provides opportunities for the development of transport infrastructure and services. Our task, therefore, is to identify and invest in transport links that require upgrades to accommodate anticipated increase in trade flows. We also need to invest in energy to power industries that produce goods for intra-African trade. I am pleased to inform you that ECA is already undertaking research and we will continue to do so in these areas. Ladies and gentlemen, let me end by assuring you that ECA, as a think tank, will continue to undertake research to inform the development of evidence-based policies and strategies in the transport and energy systems in Africa. We will also continue to provide advisory services and technical assistance to member states anchored in cutting-edge research in support of Agenda 2063 and the 2030 Agenda. Finally, as a UN organization, ECA is committed to making Africa's voice heard at the global level and bringing global best practices to the continent. In that context, we encourage all African countries to actively participate in the UN Decade on Sustainable Transport 2026-2035. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you indeed. Critical insights again. Again, the need for policy integration has been emphasized almost through all of the inputs this morning. And then critically, how we leverage Africa's huge critical minerals endowments to support inclusive growth and sustainable development. Insights also on the impacts of the current situation in the Middle East, but the key takeaway is not how we respond in the immediate, but how we build systems, both energy systems and transport systems, that become resilient in times of global shockwaves. And then critically, how we domesticate our resource base to support those. Again, around issues of digital technologies, the need for upgrading and modernizing our data infrastructure, and then critically there are issues around how data sovereignty is guaranteed by the continued development of data centers across the continent. And then of concluding with a critical call to join the architecture of global best practice as we begin to lay the foundation for Africa's growth and inclusive development towards the Africa 2063 agenda. Your Excellencies, the ministers, deputy ministers, delegates, allow me now please to invite the outgoing chair of the STC to deliver remarks.
Okay, good morning. Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you all to the 5th Ordinary Session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Transport, Transcontinental and Interregional Infrastructure and Energy. At the outset, allow me to express on behalf of the African Union Commission and all member states our sincere appreciation to the Republic of South Africa for the warm hospitality and excellent arrangement extended in hosting this session. We are particularly grateful to the government and people of South Africa for their continued commitment to advancing Africa's infrastructure, transport, and energy agenda, and for providing us with conducive environment for our deliberations. I also wish to extend our appreciation to the African Union Commission, our development partners, regional economic communities, and all stakeholders for their unwavering commitment to advancing Africa's infrastructure, transport, and energy agendas under Agenda 2063. Your Excellencies, now allow me to highlight a few but important achievements registered since our last meeting. In the transport sector, we have collectively recorded significant progress in advancing Africa's transport and mobility agenda. Notably, we celebrate the entry into force of the revised African Maritime Transport Charter on 14th August 2025, and landmark achievement that strengthens governance, enhances port efficiency, and promotes sustainable maritime development across the continent. Equally commendable is the entry into force of the African Road Safety Charter on 12 March 2026, marking a critical milestone in our collective efforts to reduce road traffic fatalities and injuries by at least 50% by 2030. Across the different modes of transport, tangible results are being delivered. In air transport, the implementation of the Single African Air Transport Market, SATM, continues to yield measurable outcomes, including the expansion of intra-African connectivity and increased liberalization of air services, directly supporting trade under African Continental Free Trade Agreement. In rail transport, the development of the African Integrated Railway Network Master Plan is providing a long-term blueprint for continental connectivity, linking production centers, markets, and ports. In road transport, progress in harmonizing regulatory frameworks and advancing smart corridors is facilitating cross-border trade and reducing non-tariff barriers. Through the African Road Safety Chart Observatory, we are strengthening the data system and institutional capacity to support evidence-based interventions that save lives. Your Excellencies, the energy sector has equally witnessed important milestones that reinforce our commitment to sustainable development and energy security. We commend the successful convening of the Africa Energy Summit in January 2025 in the United Republic of Tanzania, which mobilized high-level political commitment towards accelerating energy and investment. We also recognize the successful organization of the Continental Energy Efficiency Conference held in Addis Ababa in December 2025, which advanced dialogue on sustainable energy use and efficiency our economies. Importantly, we have made progress in strategic planning and coordination through the development of the Africa 10-year Energy Infrastructure Investment Plan, which provides a structured pathway for advancing cross-border interconnectivity and regional power integration. The successful formulation of the Africa Energy Strategy and Action Plan under the leadership of AFREC, which offers a coherent framework to guide our collective efforts towards energy security, sustainability, and resilience. These achievements reflect a commendable shift from policy development to practical implementation and measurable impact across member states. In this regard, I wish to sincerely commend Her Excellency Ms. Loreto Doroto Mataboge, Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, for her leadership and strategic guidance, as well as the dedicated teams within the Infrastructure and Energy Department under the able coordination of Dr. Kazaura. Their collective efforts have been instrumental in advancing initiatives that are ensuring Africa's transport energy systems are not only reliable and efficient, but also aligned with climate and broader development aspirations. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, while we celebrate these achievements, we must remain mindful of the evolving global context. Recent developments, including the ongoing conflict in the Gulf region, have underscored the vulnerability of global supply chains and energy markets. For Africa, this presents both a challenge and a call to action. We must therefore strengthen energy security by accelerating regional power interconnections, diversifying energy sources, and investing in resilient energy infrastructure. Secure and modernize Africa's logistics system, ensuring that our transport corridors are efficient, reliable, and capable of supporting uninterrupted movement of goods and services across the continent. Enhance coordination between transport and energy planning, recognizing that integrated infrastructure systems are essential for industrialization, trade, and economic transformation. In this regard, transport corridors and secure energy systems must be positioned as a strategic enablers of economic resilience, linking production zones, markets, and ports, while supporting the objectives of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Excellencies, the progress we have made is commendable, but the journey ahead requires renewed commitment, stronger partnership, and accelerated implementation. Let us therefore use this STC as a platform to consolidate our achievements, address persistent challenges, chart a clear and actionable path forward for Africa's transport and energy sectors. Together, we can build an integrated, resilient, and sustainable infrastructure system that drives Africa's development and delivers tangible benefits to our citizens. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Please allow me to invite you once more to afford a proper acknowledgement of both the Commissioner as well as Ethiopia for the current term of the STC. Please, can we get a round of applause? I thought there would be more energy in that round of applause. That's why I asked for the second round. Yeah, that's better. Thank you very much to Ethiopia and Commissioner for your leadership and to the Bureau as we hand over to the incoming leadership. I think what the input is demonstrated is that the idea of practicality is gaining traction. Practical steps that's moving us out of planning into execution, both across our energy systems and our transport systems. But really the clarion call is for us to consolidate that movement and begin to ensure that there's a quantum leap forward in terms of how we now proceed and strengthen our execution capability and architecture, give traction to both the 10-year infrastructure master plan for energy systems and, of course, the transport and mobility systems, including ports, rail integration, and efficiencies of our freight or air transport systems and maritime development across the continent. So thank you very much once more to the outgoing chair of the STC. At this point, Your Excellencies, the ministers, deputy ministers, delegates, please allow me to invite the Minister for Electricity and Energy in the Republic of South Africa, the co-host of this STC, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, to deliver a keynote address to this morning's session. Dr. Ramokgopa. Yeah, I think there was a bit of excitement unnecessarily so. So, Minister, please hold for a moment. I had neglected to invite Auda Napad, the CEO, to deliver his comments. My sincere apologies, and may I invite the CEO to deliver comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Good morning, everybody. I think we are sleepy a little bit, so I think, that's why he wanted me to come before the minister to wake you up so that, you'll be attentive to the minister's key message. Honorable Ministers of Transport and Energy, honorable ministers that are here today from all over Africa, honorable deputy ministers, Her Excellency, my dear sister, Ms. Lerato Matubohe, Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, our partners from ADB and ECA, excellencies, representatives of other partner institutions, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking the government of the Republic of South Africa for hosting this 5th ordinary session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Transport and Energy and the African Union Commission for its continued leadership. The African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, your development agency, attaches particular importance to this committee's work because transport and energy now sit at the center of Africa's economic future. They will shape whether the continent industrializes, whether the African Continental Free Trade Area becomes commercially real, and whether Agenda 2063 is experienced through jobs, production, connectivity, power access, and lower cost of doing business. These are no longer standalone sector discussions. They now go to the heart of whether Africa can produce, Africa can trade, and Africa can compete. These are no longer standalone sector discussions. They now go to the heart of whether Africa can produce, trade, and compete. Africa still requires, ladies and gentlemen, between $130 billion and $170 billion in infrastructure investment each year, while the annual shortfall remains between $68 billion and $108 billion. Under your program, the Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa, PAP1, only 18% of projects were completed by the 2025 deadline. Over that same period, roughly 16,000 kilometers of roads and more than 4,000 kilometers of rail were advanced and spread across 15 years and 54 countries. That level of delivery remains below what is required for a functioning single market and a more productive economy. The consequences, ladies and gentlemen, are visible in the structure of African economies. The continent accounts for about 17% of the world's population, but only 3.2% of global GDP and roughly 2% of global manufacturing value added. Manufacturing share of GDP has fallen from 12.1% a decade ago to around 11.5%. Intra-African trade remains at roughly 14.4% of formal trade. The AfCFTA is in place, but the transport, energy, and logistics systems needed to make that market function at scale remain too weak. Africa, our continent, is trying to operate a continental market on infrastructure that was never designed for continental production. Energy reflects the same constraint. Less than $2.5 billion was committed for new electricity access connections in 2023, against roughly $15 billion per year needed to achieve universal electricity access. Industrialization, ladies and gentlemen, modern logistics cold chains, digital trade systems, and large-scale agro-processing cannot be sustained on energy systems that remain this thin and this uneven. This is not only an investment challenge, it's also a question of alignment. Roads are too often planned without enough regard to production geography. Ports are upgraded without enough connection to industrial activity around them. Energy systems are expanded without clear links to manufacturing, logistics, or regional value chains. The result, ladies and gentlemen, is infrastructure that is visible, but not always sufficiently connected to production, to trade, and structural transformation. Other regions moved ahead because they organized these systems differently. The Greater Mekong subregion offers one useful example. Since 1992, it has brought together Cambodia, the Lao People's Democratic Republic, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, and the People's Republic of China through the Yunnan province and Huangzi Zhuang Autonomous Region around transport, energy, trade facilitation, and corridors linked to border areas and production zones. The southern coastal corridor linking Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam combined road investment with border reform and trade facilitation. In that corridor, cross-border freight processing times fell to under 2 hours. Physical connectivity was matched by administrative and commercial connectivity. The lesson, ladies and gentlemen, is not that Africa should replicate any other region mechanically. The lesson is that infrastructure delivers far more when it is aligned to industry, when power and logistics are sequenced around production, and when institutions are able to work across sectors over time. For the African Union Development Agency, the position is clear. Transport and energy must now be treated as industrial policy. A road that does not connect productive zones to markets has limited transformative value. A power plant that does not support industrial activity remains an isolated asset. A corridor that moves bulk exports but does not support processing, warehousing, customs efficiency, digital systems, and logistics integration will continue to reflect an extractive model. What is required now is a move from extractive corridors to productive corridors, from standalone infrastructure to integrated systems, and from project inventories to economic strategy. There are examples on this continent that already show what that means in practice. The Lobito corridor has attracted serious capital, including $553 million from the US Development Finance Corporation and $200 million from DBSA, because it is linked to a clear mineral and trade geography connecting the Copper Belt to Atlantic markets. The same applies to special economic zones. Africa now has 232 special economic zones across 43 countries, covering more than 150,000 hectares and backed by over $2.6 billion in investment. But many still underperform because they were designed as isolated sites rather than as production platforms linked to reliable power, freight systems, ports, supplier ecosystems, and industrial demand. The Kwega Special Economic Zone here in South Africa shows the difference. In 2024, it generated about $1.5 billion in income, up 32% year on year, and supported 9,842 jobs. It works because it functions inside a broader logistics and production ecosystem. This is why the PIDA PAP2 review matters. The current priority portfolio includes 69 projects valued at about $161 billion. The key issue is not simply the size of that pipeline. It is whether those projects power industries, connect value chains, support production, and make trade under the AFCFTA commercially viable. For the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, this is reflected in the work underway through the Africa 10-year infrastructure investment plan for cross-border interconnectivity, the Continental Power Systems Master Plan, and the move toward portfolio-based project preparation. Africa's challenge, ladies and gentlemen, again and again, is not only identifying need, it is structuring the right projects at the right scale, in the right sequence, with the right financing logic. That leads me directly to finance. Africa has a financing gap, but it also has an intermediation gap. The continent has growing pools of capital in pension, has growing pools of capital in pension funds, insurance assets, sovereign wealth vehicles, and domestic markets. Yet too much of that capital remains in short-term instruments or is invested offshore, while productive infrastructure remains underfunded at home. The challenge is not only to mobilize more money, it is to improve project preparation, strengthen institutional credibility, and create regulatory conditions that allow long-term domestic capital to support long-term productive infrastructure. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, these STC should therefore produce a clearer set of implementation expectations. First, every PIDA PAP2 project should carry an industrial development plan. Each proposal should set out clearly what industries it supports, what jobs it is expected to generate, what value chains it strengthens, and which special economic zones or production clusters it connects. Second, regional economic communities should align corridor plans with regional industrial strategies within a defined period. Corridors and energy interconnections should be designed to serve productive objectives rather than operate as standalone infrastructure agendas. Third, national planning systems should begin to treat transport and energy budgets more explicitly as industrialization budgets. Infrastructure investments should show which industrial clusters they serve, which value chains they strengthen, and how they reduce the cost of doing business. Fourth, domestic financial systems should be reformed so that pension and insurance capital can play a larger role in financing productive infrastructure. That requires better prepared projects and regulatory frameworks that support long-term productive assets. Fifth, member states should consider establishing integrated corridor delivery units with real authority. Transport, energy, trade, industry, and finance cannot continue to operate in parallel if the objective is structural transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, over the next 5 years, the AFCFTA will depend increasingly on whether it is backed by systems that make continental production commercially viable. A market of 1.4 billion people and roughly $3.4 trillion in GDP cannot function on fragmented corridors, underpowered industrial zones, congested borders, and logistics systems that still make it easier to trade with distant markets than with each other. The broad strategic direction, therefore, is already clear. What now matters is implementation. With stronger alignment, Africa can lower the cost of doing business across borders, build regional manufacturing platforms, process more of what it produces, use the AfCFTA as a real industrial market, and align transport, power, and trade more closely with the productive continent envisaged in Agenda 2063. Your agency, your development agency, AUD and EPAD, stands ready to support you, member states, the African Union Commission, the REX, the African Development Bank, and with other partners, will work hard in strengthening project preparation, improving corridor logic, connecting infrastructure to productive geography, and moving more projects from commitment to implementation. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, what now matters is whether infrastructure planning, financing, and implementation are brought into much closer alignment with production, trade, and industrial transformation. This session should therefore mark a clear shift from infrastructure as a catalogue of projects to infrastructure as a platform of production, from coordination in principle to delivery in practice, and from fragmented implementation to effective execution at scale. That is the standard, that is the test, and that should be the outcome of this session. I thank you.
Thank you very much, CEO of AUDA NAPAD. Again, rich insights, highlighting the challenges that we face as a continent, but more critically, framing the kind of work and interventions required out of this platform and the work that the STC would be doing in the next period to undermine some of the structural realities that our continent is facing. Stark reality of global population around 70% and a mere 3% of global GDP. It's a telling figure, but it's also an opportunity embedded. So that's where the real growth opportunity sits for our continent. Again, juxtaposing international experience, the critical takeaway there is that while we may learn from those global experiences, including other developing parts of the world, the criticality for Africa to domesticate those experiences and make them real to the African grievances of access, of energy affordability, interconnectivity of our transport systems and energy infrastructure. The CEO also pointed to an example here of how we can improve the basket of special economic zones across the continent to ensure greater output in terms of tangible economic growth, inclusive growth, pointing to the South African experience in the Eastern Shores and the Eastern Cape province of Kucha Development Corridor, where there's a critical effort to link the productive centers there with markets and integrate the kind of delivery systems we build into the SEZs. And then a big theme on financing. It continues to be a problem for how, firstly, we domesticate the capital that is meant to fund the infrastructure across the continent, and then on how we use African capital to be more productive. So away from the short-term investments into funding productive centers to grow the African economies. And then critically, the point around integrated development corridors, that integration has to expand across, undermine the kind of structural disjointedness that we currently experience, so that we're able to exponentially grow not only the levels of investment, but that the output of those investments continue to assist the continent to facilitate inclusive growth, lift Africans out of conditions of poverty into growth and development opportunities. And then, of course, concluding to extend AUDA NAPAD's continued support for this work and critically to help us drive from platforms of planning or catalogs of projects into real productive infrastructure that supports the AU 2063 program. Please, Your Excellencies, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, please allow me to ask you to extend a congratulatory, or extend an acknowledgement of the speakers who have up to now addressed you by a short clap of hands. As I now once more, and I hope now correctly placed on the agenda, invite the Minister of Electricity and Energy in South Africa, the co-host, to deliver a keynote address. Minister.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Honorable Commissioner, Her Excellency Ms. Lerato Mataboge, Honorable Ministers, Deputy Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is both an honor and privilege for South Africa to host this 5th ordinary session of the African Union Specialized Technical Committee on Transport and Energy. Across the world, energy has re-emerged as both an instrument of diplomacy and a lever of economic control, whilst transport corridors and trade routes are being reconfigured in response to shifting geopolitical and commercial realities. Supply chains are being redrawn, capital is becoming more selective, more strategic, and increasingly aligned to national interest. In this environment, infrastructure is no longer neutral. It determines who produces, who trades, who ultimately prospers. The implications are profound. We are central to the resources that will power the global transition, and we are geographically positioned at the crossroads of emerging trade corridors. Yet, we remain peripheral in the systems that capture value. This is the paradox we must resolve. Moments such as this do not simply shift market, they reorder power. As the economist, Professor Thomas Piketty, reminded us, the major reductions in inequality in the 20th century did not arise from normal market processes, but from periods of profound disruption and the fiscal and political responses that followed. The lesson is not to romanticize crisis, but to recognize that disruption reshapes economic possibility. The question before us is clear: whether we remain exporters of raw potential or emerge as a competitive, industrialized, energy secure, and logistically efficient continent that captures value across integrated transport and energy systems. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa's development challenge is not the absence of opportunity, but the persistence of structural constraints across both energy and transport systems. Over 600 million Africans still lack access to electricity, whilst close to 970 million do not have access to clean cooking solutions. At the same time, inefficiencies in transport and logistics continue to fragment our markets, increase the cost of trade, and constrain the movement of goods across borders. These are not isolated challenges. They are mutually reinforcing constraints. Energy deficits limit production and industrial output. Weak transport systems limit distribution, market access, and trade integration. The result is an economy constrained at both the point of production and the point of delivery. Until we resolve this dual constraint, Africa's industrialization will remain partial and our trade potential under-realized. Ladies and gentlemen, infrastructure must therefore be understood as the foundation of economic transformation across both energy and transport. Africa requires between $130 billion and $170 billion annually to meet its infrastructure needs, with a financing gap of up to $108 billion. This requirement spans generation, transmission, freight corridors, ports, rail systems, aviation networks, and logistics platforms. Closing this gap requires more than capital. It requires integrated planning that connects production zones, energy systems, transport networks, and markets. It requires that infrastructure is developed not in silos, but as a coordinated system that supports industrialization, trade, and regional integration. Ladies and gentlemen, energy and transport must be treated as a single economic platform. Freight corridors, port, rail system, and logistics hub depend on reliable and affordable energy to operate efficiently. At the same time, energy systems depend on transport infrastructure to move fuels, equipment, and materials, and to connect generation to demand centers. When these systems are planned in isolation, inefficiencies are embedded in the economy. When they are planned together, costs decline, reliability improves, and productivity increases. Integration is therefore not a technical preference, it is a strategic requirement for competitiveness, resilience, and economic sovereignty. Ladies and gentlemen, the 10-year infrastructure investment plan reflects an important shift from fragmented projects to structured, coordinated infrastructure pipelines. Central to this approach is the development of cross-border transmission interconnectors along integrated transport corridors that enable both the flow of electricity and the movement of goods. Your Excellencies, transport corridors are not simply physical routes. They are economic lifelines. They connect mineral deposits to processing centers, agricultural regions to markets, and industrial zones to ports. Transmission interconnectors, in turn, connect energy supply across regions, enabling power trade and system optimization. The challenge is not the existence of plans, but whether these projects are sufficiently prepared, structured, and de-risked to attract investment. Weak project preparation remains a binding constraint across both energy and transport infrastructure. Until this is addressed, the gap between ambition and delivery will persist. Excellencies, transport systems are central to unlocking the African continental free trade area. Yet inefficiencies across ports, rail system, border posts, and logistics networks continue to impose significant costs on African economies. High transport costs reduce competitiveness, limit intra-African trade, and constrain the development of regional value chains. Addressing these constraints requires targeted interventions. Ports must be modernized to improve throughput and reduce congestion. Rail system must be strengthened to move bulk goods efficiently. Border processes must be streamlined to reduce delays. Logistics systems must be digitized to improve coordination and transparency. These are not incremental improvements. They are foundational interventions required to enable trade at scale. Ladies and gentlemen, energy security remains a central pillar of economic stability. It affects industrial outputs, fiscal sustainability, and the welfare of our people. In a global environment characterized by volatility and disruption, resilient and diversified energy systems are essential. Strengthening energy security requires deliberate system design, diversified energy mixes, and deeper regional integration. Interconnected energy systems, supported by transmission interconnectors, can improve reliability, optimize resource use, and reduce vulnerability to shocks. Honorable delegates, our definition of infrastructure must also be broadened. Clean cooking remains a critical development challenge with significant implications for health, productivity, and gender equality. Addressing this gap is essential to inclusive development. Energy efficiency is equally important. It is one of the most cost-effective tools to improve system performance, reduce demand pressures, and enhance competitiveness across both energy and transport systems. Energy systems reduce costs across value chains and strengthen economic performance. Honorable delegates, alongside energy and transport, the extractive minerals industrial complex must be fully integrated into our development strategy. Africa holds a significant share of the world's critical minerals, placing the continent at the center of global industrial and energy systems. However, the challenge is not resource availability. It is value capture. The model of extraction without beneficiation is no longer sufficient. Africa must move from extraction to processing, manufacturing, and participating in the global value chain. This requires aligning energy systems to support industrial processing and designing transport corridors that move not only raw materials, but also intermediate and finished goods. Integrated industrial corridors linking mineral resources, energy supply, manufacturing hubs, and export routes are essential to converting resource endowment into economic value. Excellencies, the defining constraint before us is execution across both energy and transport systems. We have developed comprehensive frameworks. What remains limited is the capacity to implement them at scale. Fragmentation across sectors, weak project preparation, misalignment between continental frameworks and national priorities, and insufficient accountability continue to delay progress. Execution must, therefore, be strengthened across the full infrastructure value chain. Excellencies, Africa cannot rely indefinitely on external financing to deliver infrastructure at the required scale. Strengthening continental and regional financial institutions is essential. At the same time, African firms must participate across the full infrastructure value chain. Infrastructure must increasingly be built by African capability. The cost of capital remains a structural constraint. African infrastructure is often priced at a premium that exceeds actual risk, resulting in higher tariffs, reduced competitiveness, and delayed industrialization. Financing must reflect performance and potential, not perception. Delegates, flagship projects must serve as anchors of integration. The Grand Inga hydropower project remains one of the most significant continental initiatives. Its value lies not only in generation, but in its integration into a network of transmission interconnectors and major transport corridors that connect supply to demand and production to markets. In this form, such projects become continental platforms that support industrialization, strengthen regional integration, and enable transformation. We must move from measuring efforts to measuring outcomes. When we convene again, we should be reporting on megawatts added, corridors operationalized, goods moved, households connected, and jobs created. That must become the standard. Excellencies, Africa stands at a profound inflection point. This is not only a moment of opportunity, it is a moment of consequence. It will determine whether the continent secures its place within the architecture of global economy or remains peripheral to it. We are not defined by scarcity, but by strategic abundance. We hold the resources that will power the future, the demographic momentum that will shape global demand, and the clarity of what must now be done. The question before us is not whether Africa will rise, but how and on whose terms. This requires a new level of resolve, coordination, and executional discipline. Progress will not be measured by frameworks or declarations, but by what we deliver. The megawatts we bring onto the grid, the transmission lines that connect our economies, the corridors that unlock trade, and the industries we anchor on this continent. Infrastructure is not merely an economic input. It is an instrument of sovereignty. It is how we shape our development trajectory, convert resource endowment into industrial capability, and ensure that value is captured on African soil. As Kwame Nkrumah reminded us, Africa must unite. Today, that call must be realized not only in principle, but in execution. Let this session mark a decisive shift from coordination to implementation, from agreement to accountability, and from potential to delivery at scale. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Dr. Ramokgopa. Again, highlighting the critical challenges that this forum needs to attend to and that the continent needs to engage with as we move forward. How Africa must position itself deliberately in a shifting global order and seize the opportunities that exist. Infrastructure is power. How our transport systems and instruments are made instruments of African sovereignty and shape our economic outcomes. How growth continues to be constrained by these structural challenges, but that we are able to resolve and to optimize the opportunities that sits within the African continental free trade area. And then critically, integration as a lever. This point has been consistent throughout our ability to ensure that both our transport systems and our transport corridors, our energy systems and energy transmission corridors are aligned to support African growth, connecting critical production centers with global markets in a globally competitive environment. And then just how we move from resource extraction to value creation for the continent, and our ability to chart an industrialization program that taps on the full value chain of both our mineral deposits, our industrial capability, and prospects to support growth. And then the key point again that has been consistent, the critical constraint that execution capability continues to pose, and that the gaps in Africa's development deficits are not policy deficits, they are not resource deficits, but they're delivery capability deficits. And that finally, what are the measures of success as we move forward? It's not so much embedded in how many programs or how many conferences we would have attended, but what ultimately matters is what gets to be built, what is produced, how much of that is moved to global markets, who are powered from our power systems, and what economic value we offer, and ultimately who the principal beneficiaries of this development is. So thank you very much, Minister Ramokgopa, and to the esteemed panel led by the AU Commissioner. At this point, Your Excellencies, Delegates, we now move to the announcement and confirmation of the incoming Bureau. And at this point, please allow me to invite the Office for Legal Counsel to lead us on this element of the program. The Office for Legal Counsel, please. No, you will remain here for a moment. We're just going to invite the incoming.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates. Allow me, Honorable Chair, to announce the members of the incoming Bureau. On the meeting and the session of the 27th April, the STC in Transport and Energy did elect and nominate the following incoming new members of the Bureau, whose term shall be for 2 years in line with Rule 16 of the Rules of Procedure of this STC. In following the process, the announcement for call for nomination was circulated as at 8 February 2026 to the Deans of Regions, and upon beginning of the session, there were further consultations amongst regions to provide the nominations. Therefore, the following are incoming members of the Bureau. The Chair has been nominated from Central Africa as Gabon. The first Vice Chair has been nominated from West Africa as Togo. The second Vice Chair was expected to come from North Africa and has been deferred due to further consultations. The third Vice Chair came from Southern Africa and is the Republic of South Africa. Now, in following the standard procedure for seniority, the confirmed full cabinet minister came from the third Vice Chair, which is South Africa. Hence, South Africa will be chairing the Ministerial Session for this STC. Allow me, Chair, to call upon the members of the Bureau, as have been mentioned, and congratulate the following outgoing members of the Bureau, being Ethiopia as the Chair, and Chad as the first Vice Chair, the second Vice Chair as Cote d'Ivoire, the third Vice Chair as Egypt, and Rapporteur as Lesotho. Now, we welcome the following members. Perhaps they can stand in front here for recognition. Now we welcome the following: as the Chair, Gabon; the first Vice Chair, Togo; the third Vice Chair, Republic of South Africa; And our rapporteur will be the outgoing chair, which is Ethiopia. Now we will have the handover statement by the outgoing chair, being Ethiopia, followed by the acceptance statement by the incoming chair, being Gabon. Thank you.
Okay, good morning again. So as an outgoing chair and as Ethiopia hands over the chairmanship to the Gabon and the leadership team, we are very much happy to be with this with the outgoing team, and I have, in my morning speech, I have already explained the results that has been gained during the leadership of Ethiopia in the Bureau. So I wish the incoming leadership a successful and more productive stay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I invite the incoming chair, Gabon?
Good morning to you all, honorable ministers, excellencies. Thank you very much for having me today. Well, the document in front of me is written in French, so I will speak in French. Thank you very much. Excellences, Madame la ministre des Transports de la République d'Afrique du Sud, Excellences, Monsieur le ministre de l'Énergie,
Minister of Energy and Electricity, Excellent Madame Lerato Mataboge, Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy of the AUC, Mr. the Representative of the IFDB, Representative of the UN ECA, and the CEO of AUDA NEPAD, the outgoing chair, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Republic of Gabon, and on behalf of His Excellency Mafumbi, Minister of State, Minister of Trade, of Transport and Maritime Trade and Logistics, I would like first of all to express our gratitude to the outgoing chair for his leadership, his commitment, and the remarkable results that were during his mandate as he was heading this STC. We would like to also sincerely thank the host country, South Africa, for his warm welcome and the excellent organization of this meeting, as well as the AUC and all the stakeholders, for all the sustained efforts for the organization of this STC on transport and energy. Gabon, my country, would like to express its deep gratitude for the trust that has been given to him by allowing Gabon to chair. And this is, for us, a great honor. And with a great sense of responsibility, we have accepted this mandate. We would like to reassure the member states that will be very committed to this mandate with a very straight spirit of consultation with every Bureau member and the Commission. I would like to particularly thank the Minister Makoba from South Africa for having chaired the events, but also having spoken on behalf of Gabon. I would like to sincerely thank the minister. Our minister has not been able to be present, but it with great gratitude that we have seen you speak not in place but on behalf of Gabon. And we vow to work in collaboration with the AUC and all the stakeholders in order to assure the implementation of all the decisions that would have been adopted during this session, namely the strengthening of political and strategic frameworks that are in these specialized areas, the acceleration of the implementation of the programs for the continent, and of course working in synergy with the member states, the Commission and the partners, the monitoring and the evaluation systematically of all decisions taken. Gabon, my country, remains very committed to work with all in order to advance our common agenda for sustainable development, regional integration, and the prosperity of our continent. And I thank you.